Welcome back to Sunrise Daily. Well, Dr. Kenan also joins us now for this next bit. He is the CEO of Emprogate Limited, an investment advisory services, investment advisory consultant. He is. Thank you for coming on this morning.
Thank you very much,
well,
lady.
We have, now we're just trying to take a look at what the current situation is with the economy. Perhaps also trying to see what may likely happen in the days ahead, especially now that we're moving towards elections. So this is going to be about the importance of us as a country, as a people, making the right decisions. Because if we don't, you're about to show us the figures concerning what could happen if we don't. And so you've got what you refer to as what? Correlating prices and the circumstances at the moment. That's correlating the rising cost of living and the election consequences concerning the voters' choices in 2023.
Sure.
Must have been an interesting find for you.
Yes, good morning again. Thank you for inviting me. It's very thought-provoking to when you sit back and you review particularly what has happened in the last quarter of the year and how it has dramatically changed the lives of many Nigerians across different levels, from upper class to lower class. The cost of living is rising dramatically. Inflation has risen consecutively over the past 7 months. People's purchasing power has dropped. Disposable income has dropped. At the upper level, look at the cost of flights because of aviation gas oil. The business operating environment, look at the cost of diesel. Banks have even adjusted their closing times and actually have stopped some branches from operating at all and moved staff. Look at the cost of feeding, buying foodstuff. When you look at the statistics, the one that has moved, all of them are double-digit increases. So all of them are above 10%. The highest is Gary. It's bread and egg, over 34%. The lowest is Gary. So you find that people are not purchasing as much as they want, and many people are not doing 3 square meals. Again, you look at the situation with electronic payments.
Is that where you speak about the evidence of NIBSS data, where you talk about the value of e-bills payment?
Sure. I mean, most of 2018, the value of bills and the number of transactions, e-bill transactions, both rise simultaneously. So when the number of transactions rise, the value of the transactions also rise, number and value. In this particular instance, particularly quarter 2, what you have discovered from NIBSS reports is that electronic payments, the transactions have risen, value, but the number of transactions, quantity, has dropped. So a lot of people are choosing what they want to do in terms of utilities. When you come to consider pay TV, the DSTVs and Go TVs, people are subscribing less because many of them have increased their rates. You look at the cost of power. The cost of power has increased. So people are using less power. And it's also helped by the fact that the weather is cold. So at night, most people switch off their power or to conserve. So the purchasing power of the Naira has dropped because of inflation. At the same time, the price of utilities have gone up. The price of food items have gone up. And there are other external factors that have affected the price of food items as well. Remember how many farmers, 40-something farmers killed in the farm by Boko Haram the other time? So a lot of farming activities have dropped. With the increase in the price of diesel and petrol, the cost of transporting food from the agricultural farms has increased. So all these in the value chain make things get higher.
Okay, so that's where you speak about inflation trend from the MBS. So you look at the food inflation, the core inflation. So these are the areas where you highlight some of these challenges.
Exactly. So at the end of the day, what does it mean in real terms? Drop in disposable income, change in Nigerians' choices of what they want. Food comes first. Utilities will always take the back seat. because you can survive without some of the utilities. And then people are groaning under high transport costs. And the group general manager of NNPC just announced 48 hours ago that the price of fuel could rise to 469.
Maybe you should break it down for us. Tell us, why are rates rising?
The rates are rising. The inflation rates is exacerbated by rising commodity prices worldwide, the price of fuel, and so many other causes. Again, the war in Ukraine is part of it, because it's also affecting. Remember that the chairman of the African Union went to see the president of Russia over grains export. The United Nations Secretary General had to go to see the president of Ukraine and the president of Russia over the issue of allowing export of grains to be unimpeded from Russia, from Ukraine by Russian forces. So that shows us how critical Ukraine is to the global agricultural ecosystem. Now you come back home, the volatility of the naira to the dollar is also affecting a lot of things, particularly the purchasing power of Nigerians. Remember, in 2020, Nigeria was declared the poverty capital of the world. Highest number of out-of-school children, highest number of IDP camps, internally displaced camps, highest number of internally displaced persons in the world. That situation has not improved. It's actually getting worse. And you can see the federal government having set up the Northeast Development Commission to address that matter with a master plan, I think 50 billion take-off capital. They're trying to address those issues. So the poverty index is getting worse. And when you look at analysis from the World Bank, the IMF, the AFDB, Afreximbank, the figures are not good for the country.
So
we have an election coming up.
Yeah. Just before we go on, can I just ask you this? I thought that data is supposed to guide decision making.
Yes.
And the NBS has been releasing these data over the years. I mean, year on year, as you say in economics. How come these, or rather, in what ways have the data that been released and the ones that you have given, you're here to give to us, in what ways have they affected any decision creditably, or in any way that has influenced any progress in our decision making?
Well, the most evident response to NBS statistics, the immediate one that is visible to the public, is the finance bill that comes up annually every December. Because the Honorable Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning sits with her team and the economic management team. They discuss these statistics and other reports from other private sector bodies, the Lagos Chamber of Commerce, the NESG and co. And then they come to decisions. So where fiscal policy interventions will help to ameliorate some of the difficult economic situations, socioeconomic situations, as per NBS data, then they reflect that with fiscal policy interventions in the finance bill. Right now, they're having such considerations. So the Fiscal Policy Committee of the Federal Ministry of Finance does some of that. Again, if I may say, I noticed 48 hours ago, the federal government launched a poverty reduction initiative, and they've been doing some. So there's a new one launched 48 hours ago. They call it GEEP, by the Honorable Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management, giving loans of between 50,000 and 300,000 to the most downtrodden, because they see the importance of, and in particular, the creation of that ministry. The establishment of that ministry is critical. I think it's a response to the data and that report about Nigeria being poverty capital of the world. So they have been doing a lot of interventions, poverty reduction interventions.
How that has affected anything, Dr.
Now, that statistically,
just a second.
We have not been told. We don't have any information from NBS how the interventions have impacted.
Just 1 second. Slide 7 that what you have prepared for us. You said, and Chamberlain asked this question the other time. I asked that question against that backdrop of that slide, that there is food inflation rate, that MBS says the rise is driven by increases in prices of certain specifics, and then there is core inflation rate, and which is also driven by increases in prices of energy products and all of that. So how have those decisions affected these figures and these findings of MBS?
Well, MBS will have to tell us. Nobody has done, as far as I know, has done a forensic analysis yet, because it's actually, the Q2 report was released barely a week ago. So I'm sure the analysis are being done at the moment. But you point to something important. Look at the price of fuels. Cooking gas, it went up over 74%. Diesel, over 208%. Petrol. So all these have impact in the entire economy. But
Mr. Nwosu, these increases regardless,
Yes.
The federal government has had a comprehensive social investment program, particularly since 2015. If you look at the trader money, if you look at all of those other empowerment programs under its social investment program, if you look at the school feeding program for which caterers were empowered.
Exactly.
So regardless of these increases, shouldn't these the outcomes have be significantly reduced compared with what we have today, these rates and the intense poverty across the land?
Well, you're right. I know that the Vice President of Nigeria, at the time they did the National Egg Program, giving schools egg, made lofty references to the impact of the federal government's social investment programs, for which there's actually a special advisor who's a dedicated desk officer for that, and is a cabinet rank member, in addition to the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs. So the statistics of that were not released, but the Vice President made the claim that it has impacted and it's helped to reduce poverty and helped to ameliorate the hunger in the country. Fine. However, like I said, a forensic analysis will need to be done. The Presidential Economic Management Team, that's really where what their work is.
So,
working closely with the National Bureau of Statistics.
So does it then mean that those details were not able to reconcile them with the results we see? Because when you talk about details of NBS selected food price watch reports, does it mean that they don't reflect in these details which you highlight here?
Yes. Now, let me make this assumption. Before Q2, the impact of some of these interventions must have been felt at some levels of society. But remember, when I started speaking, I said a lot happened in Q2 2022. It was in that period that we saw the skyrocketing of all these prices, both the cost of food, the cost of fuels. Within that period, we saw the rise in the more volatility of the naira. We saw the rise in the monetary policy rate, the rise in the inflation rates, 19.64%, highest in 17 years since 2005. So Q2 recorded a lot of activity. Same thing, the rise in petrol prices, diesel prices. So whatever gains may have been recorded from those interventions are now eroded. And Nigerians are getting more desperate. And that is why I was particularly happy with the Honorable Minister of Communication and Digital Technology. Was it yesterday or the day before yesterday?
Yeah.
He announced he did not support the additional tax that was going to be placed on telecommunication calls. For God's sake, you need to make a lot of calls. People keep calling, asking for help, left, right, and center. And you want to add to it. And he said no. And then the committee is set up to do the review. It was dead on arrival. Now, note something important. In Q2, there was a sharp rise. I didn't mention that in my presentation, but as I will speak to you, there was a very sharp rise in the value and quantity of diaspora remittances to Nigeria from Nigerians overseas into the country, much sharper than we have seen in several quarters going back. Because there are a lot more requests from Nigerians here for help from their families overseas.
What? Why? Leveraging on the calls?
No, not leveraging on the courts.
Why was
necessarily? Because things are more difficult here. So they're asking for more help. So there's a lot more money coming from overseas. Because with the volatility of the naira, you change $1, you have the black market somewhere or something.
I hope they're not about to make it more difficult, so there are more resources.
That's what I cannot project. So that's very instructive, and I hope the economic managers of the country are looking at that, because the Nigerians in the diaspora are picking a lot more interest in what's happening in our country. And they are shining out there. Look at the Minister of Secretary of State for Trade in the UK announced yesterday, a Nigerian lady who relocated from this country about 15 years ago. So Nigerians are doing quite well there and now helping with what's happening back home. And that's why when you link it to the elections that are coming up.
That leads you to page 11 of what you talk about, the clear and present danger.
Correct.
Is that it?
Clear and present danger. How many months away are the elections? 6 February is presidential. It's a series of elections. I'm not talking about only the presidential. One of the key drivers of electoral malpractice is poverty. And a key electoral malpractice is voter buying and voter selling. Vote buying and vote selling. INEC has officially admitted it is a major problem. And they have mentioned it, that it occurred at Osho election, at the Ekiti election. Prices ranging to different levels. So, hunger is a driver for a voter to sway his attention or his vote. Now, what makes it worse is that there's voter apathy. INEC had announced in February last year that the average percentage of voters out of the total number of registered voters in this country is about 35, between 30 and 35%.
Speak to this.
Yes, research studies have established direct correlation between income, voter apathy, and voter decision. So in an environment of pervasive, the word is, that's adjective, pervasive poverty, vote buying and selling will easily thrive. So that's what I'm saying. Now, voter registration figures are there. But the number of people that vote is between 30 and 35, 36%. Ekiti election, or State election, recorded about the same percentage. And I understand that Anambra was even worse. It was about 10.38%, but viewed largely because of the insecurity in the country. So when somebody is not even interested in voting because they believe their votes will not count.
And you don't think this renaissance among the youths, in terms of politics, will not temper vote buying in 2023?
It could temper vote buying. And again, it's because of what? Response to the poverty situation. We're not happy with this. We want to change the situation. So who are the candidates that will give us the best value proposition? Those are the people who are going to vote. So now we want to get... Now, what they are doing is those who are not registered, that voter apathy, those who are not registered are now registering. Now, that's layer 2. Layer 1 is those who have been registered all the time have not been coming out to vote. So there's voter apathy.
And I see you speak about the consequences, which is, if you look at you target the consequences of anticipated poverty-induced vote buying and selling.
Correct. So, if somebody is in the house and is not interested in voting, is not interested in even registering, and you come to him and you offer him, you make him an offer, I will give you so amount so that you can be eaten. I want you to go and register. You're going to vote for my party. You encourage him. That's an incentive. He registers. On the voting day, he doesn't want to come out to vote. My vote is not going to count. You say, no, your vote will count. I'm going to induce you. The man is hungry. So he's looking at the immediate gain. He doesn't want to know whether the person will deliver good governance or not. So you see the danger of poverty. So this is why I'm saying the federal government needs to do something about it. Not just the federal government, all stakeholders. You can see the CSOs, the political parties, the federal government, development partners need to come together. There has to be active too. First of all, there has to be more strategic poverty reduction initiatives. and fiscal policy interventions, in other words, governance interventions, to reduce the rising poverty.
How can that change within the few months that we have on our hands?
Well,
look at this. I just saw something now. If my
just move to page 15. That's what the consequences are.
Because
one of the consequences, I mean, you just listed a number of people. A number of people now. You've listed, CSOs, development partners, and the rest of them.
The government, yes. And
Now,
political parties.
the question that comes to my mind, I mean, look at this: unemployment, illiteracy, and all of that. They are not just at some utopian federal government level. They are in the states. They're at the local government levels as well.
Of course.
What is the intervention that the people themselves can have among themselves? Because unless we as a people have a united, decision that we want to change things, aping from the question Bukola asked the other time, things may not necessarily change. You all already gave the stats of 35% average voter participation in every general election.
Exactly.
So with all of these and the interventions of the state and all of those things, what's our task here, really?
Thank you very much. It's a heavy one. What our task is? Well, number one, stakeholder engagement. It's important that the federal government should lead, perhaps to the Nigerian Governors Forum, from the public side. And then the social intervention chief executives should lead a major stakeholder engagement on how do we tackle this clear and present danger in the short term, because it's a short term from now to the elections. So that should be a starting step. Development partners should give us their own expert advice, technical support, based on because this is not the first time. What is happening here has happened in many other countries, Somalia, Eritrea, and all, and India, Pakistan. Two, there has to be major sensitization programs by CSOs in particular, that your vote counts. Go out and register, and don't sell your votes.
Pardon me. Jump to page 16. Now, all of what you're saying now shows us the consequences of what could happen if we don't get it right. So can we look at that page 16 so that you can just break it down, and then, because, I mean, relating with those figures could just give us at least that proper perspective in terms of, wait a minute, so the figures don't lie, I mean, you say. But I see you say here that what could happen on the economy front if voters elect suboptimal governance in 2023? So inflation rate, 19.64%, you say.
Exactly. Major consequences. If there's widespread voter buying and voter selling, and you don't get the right people in governance, the impact of voter buying and vote buying and vote selling. First, you have a suboptimal government, so there will be under governance. Secondly, there won't be sufficient accountability in government, because whoever gets in at whatever level, federal, state, local, will not feel accountable because he or she bought their votes.
Money on votes.
And thirdly, the poverty cycle continues. These are the key impacts. So poverty leads to vote buying and vote selling, and then leads to these three things I've just mentioned. So look at the current statistics. What is the current inflation rate? I've mentioned 19.64%. Food inflation rate, about 22.02%. You look at the monetary policy
and you also talk about exchange rate.
The exchange rate,
25 naira.
It's not steady, but that's the official rate. In the black market, it's selling over 700 naira for the dollar.
So what's going to happen to that if we elect suboptimal government?
If they don't manage the economy well, and monetary policy is not right, Nigeria could go above 1,000. Purchasing power drops, disposable income drops, and if the prices of fuel and food keep rising, crazy. Our debt to GDP ratio, you see the statistics there, it's dangerous. And the World Bank the IMF has said that Nigeria, over the next 5 years, 2027, that our debt to GDP ratio may rise to 44%.
Because even though...
because 2027 is when the new president elected in 2023 will be finishing his first term. So IMF is saying The debt to GDP ratio could rise to 44%. It's there, it's online. It's not my figure. So we should be careful. And the DMO had released the figures and said, for now the debt is sustainable, but we're running a deficit budget. So one of the consequences, when I say the consequences of inaction, if you don't get in the government that is right, you're going to have these issues.
Okay.
So everybody decide what you want.
All right. Okay, Mark, we have some questions for you as well.
Thank you.
I have been thinking of how best to couch this question, because it would seem that a number of parties are beginning to get wise. And maybe it's wise in a negative way. You've talked about how NGOs have, or CSOs have, a job of work on their hands, perhaps in addition to INEC, to educate particularly rural communities about the importance of their votes, and telling them that they should come out and that their votes will count. But that they need to be wary of those who would seek to buy their votes. Now, from the experience that we have seen, since when the term in recent times, I mean, vote buying is nothing new in Nigeria's political history, if we're to read through the books. But in recent times, we do know when we started hearing the term stomach infrastructure. And when that term was introduced, or since when that term has been introduced, it's been a bit difficult to try and get the parties, because it would seem that one party got his nose particularly bloodily bruised in that particular elections where we heard stomach infrastructure. And since that time, it would seem that almost all the parties, especially the two major parties, have been at the front burner of buying votes. If you look at the off-season elections that have been conducted. So when you tell citizens to vote right, and maybe for some of the parties, they're not going to be buying the vote on the day of the election. Some of them might even try to buy it before the elections. I mean, by some of the programs that they might have, you know, I do not know if that will qualify in your books as well as buying vote, empowerment programs, so to speak. How would you say that voters should analyze? How would they be able to tell the parties, the people that they think will have their best interest at heart, in spite of all of because some people will say they are politicians, they'll do anything to see how they can get the votes. If that's what the people want, that's what they're going to do. So how would you say that they should analyze what each party is bringing, and how to look past whatever it is that they're doing to see, you know, who would really be able to deliver when they get into office?
I like your last words. Who will deliver when they get into office? Two things come straight to mind in response to your observations and your question. The first is that there is a rising trend from research and observation that voters are focusing more on the individual, not necessarily the party. That is what we see. So if one party that may be unpopular in some parts of the country, but presents a candidate that they believe could deliver, because there is, among every 12, there's one Judas. Everybody cannot be Judas. They will vote for the person. Secondly, you ask, how can the voters make their decision? In my presentation, I had raised that point, and what I said was, okay, maybe we should have a template to say what are the minimum we expect from candidates. The question then is, what template will this be? The rising food prices is one of the benchmarks, template of benchmarks. Who is going to reduce the cost of food? Another is who is going to reduce the cost of fuels. And then I made a recommendation. Some people may debate it or say otherwise. The National Development Plan of Nigeria, 2021 to 2025, is a 5-year medium-term development plan for the country. And it was prepared by technocrats, not politicians, selected across country, across economic sectors. And they made projections for the development of different aspects of the economy. It's a complete pyramid approach. So they set targets. What should be that the unemployment rate, which is currently 33% by NBS statistics, within the next 5 years should be reduced by 10%, for instance. that we should have up to 10,000 megawatts generated by 2025. So they set a number of targets for 2025. What should be the inflation rate should be single digit by 2025 or before then. So the number of parameters that they outlined, and the GDP should be grown to, is it 44 trillion or so? No, not the GDP rate. Okay, the GDP rate was added, what it should rise to. The contributions of sports and the creative sector and ICT should increase their percentage contribution to GDP. So some of those benchmarks outlined in the National Development Plan could also be benchmarks that voters at different levels could utilize to say, hey, this is what the technicals prepared. This candidate, how do you think you can be able to achieve this? Tell us your strategies. You, how do you think? And then whoever says the best wins. That's partly what we see when the British have their debates. All the candidates are standing for prime minister, and they speak to the benchmarks and how you want to deliver. Here we also do similar debates, so let's see how that's going to go. So let's watch.
I'd like to hear them speak to the benchmarks. Yeah, well, it'll be good to see them speak to those benchmarks and speak to some of those economic indices and what they want to do, what policies they want to bring to bear to ensure that we don't go south, as it were. So
policy interventions, legislative interventions, social interventions, political interventions, all this different strata, speak to them. And like I said, because the National Development Plan was developed by technocrats, not politicians, it's a document that outlines a vision for the first term of the president. It's 2021 to 2025. So his term doesn't end 25, it ends 27, but at least 23 to 24 is 1 year, 24 to 25 is 2 years. So in 2 years, you will know a government that is serious. So whoever, even at the state levels, because the entire projections also go to subnationals. If the candidate does not tell you how you can do it best, you don't vote for him. So don't do the stomach infrastructure as the basis for voting.
Good place to anchor. We'll keep tabs on that one and hold them to account with those circumstances and those figures. Thank you very much indeed. This is the first of many to come. Dr. Ken Nwosu, CEO, Emprigate Limited, and investment consultant. We are back in a moment. Stay with us.